Okay, so I'm going to have a PowerPoint presentation for everybody in a few minutes. It's about a 20-minute presentation. It'll be the same presentation if you attended the work session a few weeks ago. So no new materials. We're just going over that presentation again. We'll be asking questions and feedback and receiving feedback at the end of the presentation. And I'll share my screen and get started in just a minute.
Do you want to hold off on questions until maybe the end of the presentation?
Yes. Okay, I believe everybody should be able to see my screen. And we'll get started. Okay, so hello, thank you for attending this workshop to discuss the Springfield Development Code amendments for annexation. My name is Haley Campbell. I'm a senior planner with the City of Springfield and the project manager for this code amendment. Also with me today are several staff members from the City of Springfield to hopefully help answer your questions. And as Sarah mentioned, in a few minutes, we are recording. So this presentation will be available to the public to review later for those that couldn't attend today. As I mentioned earlier, it's a 20 to 30-minute presentation. Please hold all questions until the end. It might be worthwhile to have a notebook with you to take notes, and we'll try to get to everybody at the end, depending on how many people and the length of the comments. We need to cut them short. We've got about an hour to get through this presentation and answer questions. Okay, so the first part, why is Springfield amending the annexation section of the development code? This project would amend the annexation section of the Springfield Development Code in an effort to enable efficient, timely review that aligns with state law. The amendments will clarify the application and initiation types. It amends Springfield Development Code 5.7.125 for initiation method requirements and application requirements to clarify what documents are required for the various annexation applications. It improves efficiency and timeliness for staff and officials to process applications and make a decision. By changing Springfield Development Code 5.7.115 review to provide an option where an annexation does not require but may go to a public hearing, and to remove redundant terms in Springfield Development Code 5.7.113 and address appropriate processes in Springfield Development Code 5.7.115. What is annexation? Annexation is a process by which properties outside the city limits become incorporated into the city and thus can receive city services. The Springfield City Council makes the decision whether to approve an annexation request. If approved, the UF10 or Urbanizable Fringe Overlay Zoning District no longer applies. For example, if your property is currently zoned R1, low density residential, UF10, once annexed, it will be zoned R1. Some service providers also change upon annexation. For example, if the annexation area is within a water supply district or rural fire district, the city will process a request to withdraw the annexing territory from the water district or fire district. If the property is not already within Willamette Park and Recreation District service boundary, it will be annexed into the district at the same time the property is annexed into the city. What is the history of annexation in Springfield? From 1864 to 1960, the city did not expand beyond the area bounded by Main Street, Q Street, 28th Street, and Kelly Butte. In 1960, Springfield annexed Thurston to the east. The area had no paved streets, sewers, or storm drains. The 1960 annexation was appealed. A court found that it was reasonable given the pressure for new home sites, sewers, and police protection. During the 1970s, another spurt of annexations added another 2 square miles. Springfield has not actively annexed property since the 1970s. Annexation was and is driven by property owners' requests to be included within the city limits and where the minimum level of services can be provided. Who approves annexations in Springfield? The Lane County Boundary Commission was created by the Oregon Legislature in 1969. and was governed by Oregon Revised Statutes 199, which approved annexations previously. The Boundary Commission was abolished in 2008 due to the passing of Senate Bill 417, which required the city to take on the responsibilities of the Boundary Commission. The city's role prior to Senate Bill 417 was to determine if services could be extended, request council adoption of a resolution to support the annexation, and deliver to the commission the documentation used by the council for the recommendation. The Boundary Commission's job was to validate all signatures on forms, confirm electors, review the legal description, prepare legal notices, prepare the staff report in response to legislative criteria of approval and the Metro Plan policies, and staff the Boundary Commission public hearings. Following approval, they would provide notice. And after the Boundary Commission was abolished, the responsibility fell to the city, and the criteria and process for annexations changed. So what changed from the Boundary Commission to the city processing annexations? The main differences between the Boundary Commission and the City Council annexations include, under the Boundary Commission rule, or ORS Chapter 199, non-contiguous annexations were permitted, whereas ORS Chapter 222 does not allow non-contiguous annexations. Boundary Commission approval was required if water or sanitary sewer was extended outside the city limits of the service provider, also known as an extraterritorial extension. ORS 222 recognizes extraterritorial extension for purposes of health hazard remediation. The existing code for health hazard extraterritorial extension of services is not subject to change with these code amendments. ORS 199 allowed for approval of some annexations within 25 days of submittal and without a public hearing. ORS 222 allows for annexations without a public hearing when they are initiated as owner consent. So the first topic we're going to be talking about today clarifies the three types of initiation methods for annexation: owner consent, triple majority, and double majority in the code. To understand the differences between the types, consider that an owner consent annexation is when all of the owners and not less than half of the electors consent to an annexation. A triple majority is when more than half the owners, who also own more than half the land in the contiguous area and represent more than half of the assessed value of the property, consent to the annexation. A double majority is when a majority of the electors and owners of more than half the land consent to the annexation. Note that City Council may initiate annexation of public right-of-way or other public land contiguous to the city limits by resolution. Topic 2 covers Springfield Development Code 5.7.115 Annexation Review. This section was amended by adding an owner consent initiated annexation, which does not require a public hearing, including a review process for double majority and triple majority annexation applications. And for consistency and clarity, move the recommendation to City Council and appeals process to this section as they are part of the review process. On the topic of public hearings, there is a difference between the current code requirements and the minimum state requirements for public hearings. In the current code, practically everything goes to public hearing because nothing meets the exception in the code. The code requires a City Council public hearing for annexations with an exception in one narrow context: a single lot or parcel adjacent to the city limits and city services and not dividable by partition or subdivision. The reduction in minimum lot size changes made during previous phases of the Development Code Update project made the clause "not divisible by partition or subdivision" less applicable than before. The minimum state requirement for hearings, on the other hand, require a public hearing for double majority and triple majority annexations. No public hearing is required for owner consent initiated annexation. Note that the proposed legislative code does not, although not required by state law, includes an option for council to call for a public hearing for owner consent initiated annexation. We are seeking feedback on the public hearing options so that no hearing would be required for owner consent initiated annexation with a failing septic on a small lot. This exception would apply when the property is on a single lot or parcel less than 10,000 square feet, with a failing septic and in the R1 district. After reviewing annexations submitted to the city during 2023 to 2024, only one application met these criteria, but it was not an owner consent initiated annexation. We are also seeking feedback on another option to the exception, which would be no hearing for owner consent initiated annexations unless the property includes natural resources or natural hazards. Certain areas and districts could impede a property from being adequately served by water, sewer, stormwater drainage, or streets at the time that development is complete. The city could require a public hearing for owner consent initiated annexations when 1. The property is in the Hillside Overlay District. 2. The property is in the Floodplain Overlay District. 3. The property includes a water quality limited watercourse. Or 4. The property has a locally significant wetland or riparian area. Half of the annexation applications submitted to the city during 2023 to 2024 included natural resources or areas with natural hazards. The 2 owner consent annexations did not include natural resources or areas with natural hazards, so would not have required a public hearing. Topic 3 is about SDC 5.7.125, Annexation Initiation and Application Submittal. This section was amended by breaking down the initiation method and application requirements by application type pursuant to either owner consent, double majority, or triple majority. Topic 4 is about the public hearing requirements in Springfield Development Code 5.7.130. Under the current code, notice of a public hearing is mailed at least 14 days prior to the public hearing to the applicant, property owner, and electors of the property. Owners and occupants within 300 feet of the perimeter of the affected territory, any recognized neighborhood group or community organization, any affected special district or utility provider, and the Lane County Land Management Division, Lane County Elections, and the Lane County Board of Commissioners. We are also seeking feedback on public hearing notices to meet the minimum required by state law or an alternative. The first option is provided in the legislative code amendments and complies with the minimum requirement in state law. According to ORS 197.7972, a local quasi-judicial land use hearing requires that notice of the hearing is provided to the applicant and to owners of property within 100 feet of the subject property to be annexed, where the property is wholly or in part within an urban growth boundary. This option reduces overhead costs to applicants and the city by amending the notice requirements to include only owners of properties located within 100 feet of the perimeter of a property to be annexed. The second option keeps the notice requirements as they are written in the existing code under Springfield Development Code 5.7.130. That notice of a public hearing is mailed to owners and occupants of properties located within 300 feet of the perimeter of the property to be annexed. The third option could amend who, owners and occupants, or just owners, and from what distance, a minimum of 100 feet to 300 or more feet to which notice is given. But what standards were not changed in these code amendments? The criteria of approval in Springfield Development Code 5.7.140. The zoning section in Springfield Development Code 5.7.150. Unincorporated land within the UGB is distinguished from land within the city limits by the addition of the Urban Fringe Overlay District, or UF10. The UF10 overlay district will continue to cease to apply, and the current zoning will apply when annexation approval is granted, and that annexation is voluntary. So what are some examples of the different types of annexation applications? The first on the screen is a double majority annexation on High Banks Road. It's 25 acres of property abutting an industrial use. The site is a former gravel quarry that is being actively reclaimed under a permit from the state. The request to annex was to facilitate future development of the site, like outdoor storage. The application was a double majority, as the majority of the electors and more than half the owners in the area consented to the annexation. The second example is a council resolution annexation on Linda Lane, where 35 acres of R1 UF10 district property and portions of public right-of-way for Linda Lane were annexed. The property is owned by the city and Lane County, who was a co-applicant for county-owned right-of-way. Annexation was a benefit, as it clarified jurisdictional range of the various roads bisecting the property and allows for the creation of a wetland conservation bank for mitigating wetland impacts from the extension of the Jasper Trunk sewer line. The City Council, by resolution, may initiate annexation of public right-of-way or other public land contiguous to the city limits. The last example is an owner consent initiated annexation, where the applicant was proposing to annex 0.86 acres of residential property and a 45-foot wide by 213-foot long segment of Kinsley Avenue public right-of-way. The Mountain Vale subdivision, the lots to the west in the picture, extended the sewer line and included a stub to the front of the property. The applicant requested annexation to facilitate connection of the existing house to the sanitary sewer. Under the proposed code amendments, a property owner may not need to pay for notice of a public hearing to annex their property to the city limits if a public hearing is not required. So we'd now like to revisit the draft code and open the floor up to the public for feedback as well as questions. I'm going to leave this slide up for just a minute in case you want to take down my contact information. That's Haley Campbell, Senior Planner. And my email is H as in hat or house, Campbell as in the soup, Camp and Bell at springfield-or.gov. And you can also view any of these documents on our website. That's springfieldoregonspeaks.org. And we also accept public comments on that website as well. So just a minute, I'll stop sharing and we'll get to questions.
Hi, Haley. Are you going to be limiting the time of public comment?
I don't believe so, since we have just a few people here in public attendance. So we'll see who has any questions. I guess the function, if people are unfamiliar in Zoom, to ask questions is at the bottom of the screen. You hover over that and there's a raise hand function. You click that and Sarah Weaver will be responding or unmuting you so that you can ask your questions.
I am allowing Mr. Satter to talk.
Excellent presentation, Haley. Thanks. And I'm glad I ran into you this morning because I didn't know you had the Zoom session this afternoon. So that was very fortuitous. I'm interested in the proposed change in the extent of public notice. On one hand, 100 feet seems like a very narrow perimeter. But I really don't have a strong opinion one way or the other, whether it's 100 or 300. The idea of not including occupants, but only including property owners, I don't really have a strong opinion one way or the other. I'm inclined. Part of me says let's keep public notice extensive, like keep it the way it is, owners and occupants for 300 feet. But then part of me is thinking of from the client's perspective and expediency. And I'm thinking, okay, if I had a property near me that was had an annexation proposal and I was more than 100 feet away, I mean, I think my single family tax lot's 100 feet. in depth. And so I think, I mean, like I said, I don't have a strong opinion one way or the other, but if it stayed at the existing 300 feet to owners and occupants, it seems like that's a fair thing for public participation.
Great. Thank you, Rick.
Sure.
Appreciate your feedback. Oh, and would you, after you've commented, unless you have any other questions, would you unclick the raise hand button? Just so we don't call on you again.
No, and I can click it off. So,
Okay.
And then now Mr. Bruce White would like to make a comment.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the presentation. My question, I don't think was, it's about something that wasn't touched on in your presentation. And I'm curious about annexation as it relates to subdivision of parcels. And under the current regulation, if I or one of my neighbors wanted to annex for the purpose of subdividing our parcel, would a public hearing be required? And then under the new proposal, would a hearing still be required or no longer required? How does subdivision play into this change in the annexation process?
So subdivision after annexation, I believe was your first question. Is that correct? And if there's a notice for that after?
Correct. That I'd want to say annex for the purpose of subdivision.
So as noted in the presentation, we do provide notice to those owners and occupants within 300 feet. That's in the existing code.
Okay.
For land division process, that's a different process outside of this process that we're talking about here. Andy, do you want to provide any comments on what the notice would be for a land division process?
Well, in hearing what he has to say, I'm assuming that the property is going to be larger than 10,000 square feet in order to affect a subdivision. So it might be acreages, let's say acre or more, or maybe half acre. So I think under the proposed annexation code, you would also have to provide public notice for annexation of a property that is not facing a failing septic, that is large enough to divide. I believe that's what the recommendation is under the proposed code. The only exception being where a annexation public hearing would not be required is if it were a single home on a single lot, which is essentially not dividable. It's essentially, we'll call it a city lot, so to speak, and they're facing a failing septic system. They could move forward to annex without having a public hearing. So I guess in either case, existing or proposed, Bruce, there would be a public hearing required. And then the land division action, which would be a proposed subdivision, could then take place because it's not allowable under the urbanizable fringe. You could partition the property, you cannot subdivide the property, and so that annexation is I guess a prerequisite to moving forward with the subdivision of the property.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions from the public? Any feedback about what was presented?
Rick, I guess you could probably unmute. It looks like you've got another question.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. Haley, could you summarize again for us when a public hearing is and is not required in the existing code versus the proposed code?
Yes. So in the existing code, we require a public hearing for most annexations, except in one narrow context, and that's if you are a single lot or parcel not dividable by a subdivision or partition. So, and as I mentioned in the presentation, that's kind of less applicable now because of our middle housing code that took effect in 2021. And that's because we reduced our lot sizes. In the previous code, our average lot sizes were about 5,000 square feet. And now our average lot size can be as little as 3,000 square feet or even smaller in some instances. So the proposed code would not require a public hearing for owner consent annexations. Now, we do have some like exceptions to that. So the first exception is for if you have if you're in a hillside area or in the floodplain overlay district, if you have a water quality limited water course, a wetland or riparian area on your site. And that would still potentially go to a public hearing, even if it was an owner consent annexation. And back at the beginning, we described an owner consent annexation as all of the owners of land in a territory and not less than 50% of the electors, if any, residing in the territory have consented in writing to the annexation and file a statement of their consent to annex with the city. The other instance where you could file an owner consent annexation, but it would still go to a public hearing is if the city council elected to hold a public hearing. That is in our proposed code. And that's, that's just kind of the bare minimum that we have in there. That could be any annexation that was filed under owner consent. City council could look at that application and say, we want to hold a public hearing. We want to hear public comments on this. And then the only kind of exception to having to hold a public hearing for owner consent, so no hearing is required, when you have a single water parcel less than 10,000 square feet with a failing septic and in the R1 district or low density residential. And then from the annexations that we've reviewed within the last year and a half, only one application met that criteria.
Thank you, Haley. So if I understand in the proposal, if owners and electors of a property have signed consent, and if there are no natural resources or no natural hazards, then there would not be a public hearing. But in the background, the city council could always choose to elevate it to the process to include a public hearing if they wanted to.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Haley, if I
Ms.
can just jump in real quick, and I just for the benefit of folks that are joined us, to this point, the city has not annexed any property without holding a public hearing. So even annexations where there is essentially a failing septic and the property already has septic service at their doorstep, and it's a matter of us, getting permits and paying fees to connect. Those annexations have still gone before the city council up to this point. So it's maybe almost, kind of a moot point at that point because it's not a distinguishable difference between being annexed and not annexed when there's no development associated with it. It's a matter of the services being provided. So just clarify that point. So thank you.
Thank you, Andy.
Okay, Ms. Paz would like to ask a question or make a comment.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
So if one, I came in late. I don't know. I'm curious about cost of annexation. How is that? If you could refer general information if one volunteers to annex, how that goes, and what kind of cost are we talking about? Everything cost is a concern.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, let me say that like annexation is really site specific. Like as I just mentioned and talked about in the feedback, it really depends on if it's a already developed property, maybe with a house, or if it's a lot that doesn't have anything on it. Proximity to existing services in the city limits, things like that. We did poll our staff to get an average, like the average cost of annexation in the city of Springfield for an average lot. And that's around $16,000.
And how is that paid then? So is that like in installments? How is that? That falls on each property owner, I suppose.
That is correct. So we have like a fee for the application itself. We have a fee for hooking up to city's services, usually for sewer, because most, if you have a property in the urbanizable area that maybe it's a single family house, and it's on its own septic system, and the septic system fails and or it doesn't, and you do decide that you do want city sanitary services, there's a fee and an assessment for hooking up to those services. I might be forgetting something else, but those are like the key, those are the key fees for annexation. And they are paid out as we go through the process. As we go through the application process, it gets approved. There's a fee for notice, as I mentioned in the public workshop, and that's for notice being provided to your owners and occupants within 300 feet of you. There's a notice that has to be provided to the newspaper. We do post around the city and on the property, and then we do provide notice after the annexation is approved to anybody who provided public testimony, and then to service providers in the community to let them know that there's a new property that has been annexed and will or may need access to those services.
Do you know those fees, I suppose, are fixed? And do you know the cost of those initial fees?
It's not recommended that I give them like, piecemeal, because like I said, like every annexation, it could change, right? It could depend on like, we have a general one for like how big your site is. So like the annexation application, it could be, if you're less than 10,000 square feet, it could be a flat rate, or if you're bigger, it could go up.
Okay, I understand.
So really depends on
They
the
are
type of stick.
available. Sorry to jump in, Haley. The city's fee schedule is available online. It's under section 8 or with chapter 8, which is the planning fees. And so it shows the annexation fees, and they're generally prorated by the size of the property. There is a comprehensive planning fee that the city council has decided to not implement right now. So it is actually saving people money. The fee schedule is set on an annual basis by the city council, and that would be done independently of the code changes that are proposed right now. So if someone were to want to investigate how much, so Claudia, if you were curious to know exactly how much it would cost, I'd recommend getting in touch with city planning staff after the meeting. And we can look at your property and we could provide a pretty good estimate as to the cost for application fees to annex. And that is not including things like having someone do the work to connect plumbing pipes to your house, for example, if your septic is failing, or if you'd want to switch over from a septic system to a pipe system, that sort of thing. That's not included. It's just sort of the city implemented fees. But we can look at the characteristics of your property and give you a pretty good indication as to what the costs are. There are certain fees, and I think it's the system development charges fees that can be apportioned out over a 10-year period. I think they call it like a Bancroft type of a payment plan, where it can be amortized over 10 years. But most of the fees are due and payable upfront. So hopefully that clarifies that.
Okay, thank you.
And Haley, I believe that Christina Kraz, our city assistant city attorney, has something to mention.
Yes.
I just wanted to clarify that this process for updating the code doesn't directly change the fees. What could change is if less public notice is required, then the costs to provide that public notice go down, and the applicant for annexation doesn't have to pay as much public notice fees. But otherwise, application fees or the sewer in lieu of fees or other costs associated with annexation would not be changing under this code update.
Thank you. The cost sounds discouraging, to be honest, but each one will be considering it on their own.
Correct.
I don't see anybody with a raised hand currently on the attendee list. Mr. White would like to ask a question.
Just one final question, since this is being recorded, will there be a link to this recording somewhere on the city website?
Absolutely. So if you received notice of this, or even if you didn't, I mentioned it on the last slide that SpringfieldOregonSpeaks.org is our official public comment website for this project. If you go to the website, on the right-hand side, there's a column of all our current active projects. And it's the middle project is the annexation code amendments. If you click on that project page, which has all of this information, all of the draft code, the link to the facts page, frequently asked questions, our public outreach plan for this project, and it'll have future documents as the project progresses. I will also include a link that will be uploaded to YouTube as well for this recording. So you can view it at any time and feel free to share it with other people who may have questions.
Thank you.
And Ms. Combs would like to either pose a question or make a comment.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I have a question. So if I was decide to not annex at this time, and I had a problem with my septic system, and I needed to have either a repair or a replacement tank done, would I be allowed to do that, or will I be forced to annex?
So we never force you to annex. That is number one. Like as I mentioned in the presentation, the documents, the notice that was provided, annexation is always voluntary to the city of Springfield. We do have a requirement that because technically you're not in the city limits and you do have an existing septic system, that septic system is monitored for its health consistency, overall process, or how it's working, functioning. That is looked at by Lane County, and if it fails, then we need to kind of consider what our options are. Usually, if you're within 300 feet of existing city services, then we do ask that you consider annexing to the property. We do have an option for extending services from outside the city limits to property, but there is usually an annexation contract that needs to be signed by the property owner, saying that eventually you will annex to the city limits and you will pay those fees.
I want to jump in real quick, Haley, because that's not accurate information. So I want to make sure that we give them correct information. Okay, so first of all, it sounds like your question is, would you be forced to annex and connect to city sewer as opposed to being able to repair your septic system?
Right, so maybe forced isn't the correct word to
yeah.
use, but I would have no choice because I am very aware of the upfront costs for these services, and most people in the city of Springfield, on the average, would have to take out considerable loans to have these processes done, and to replace a septic tank would be way, way lower of a cost. And I have concerns about myself and other elderly, older, or retired people, veterans and otherwise, that would be devastated by the cost of annexation.
Yeah, I totally understand that concern. It's a matter of state law that the city implements. So the requirement is that if your septic needs repair or replacement, and you are currently, the law is 200 feet from the public sewer, then the county will not grant you that repair or replacement permit, and your only alternative is to annex to the city and receive city sewer services. I believe there are potentially some financing options for the city's charges, but I understand that there are all kinds of costs associated with connecting a property to the city sewer system that are not, that are, out of pocket costs for a homeowner, on just, your own construction costs as well. So understand that concern. It's not something that we can change through this process because it is state law. The current distance is 200 feet. That at some point may sunset if the Oregon legislature doesn't continue to renew that change. And then it would go back to the 300 feet that Haley was referencing. And then there was something else that you said, Haley, that I want to make sure that we provide the correct information about.
Annexation contract.
Yeah, we actually do not have the authority under our code currently to extend sewer services to someone who is unannexed with an annexation contract. But there's part of the proposed code is that we would allow that in certain circumstances. So just want to clarify that without these code amendments, the city does not have authority to connect anyone to sewer if they're not annexed to the city. But the proposal is what Haley described.
And Ms. Laurel would like to also either pose a question or make a comment. You can unmute, Ms. Laurel.
Okay. What is the deadline for your proposed code? Do you have a date?
So it's a long process to have this code updated, usually around 6 months. We're in the very beginning stages of public adoption process. So the next public hearing with the Planning Commission is August 6th. And that could be a great opportunity to provide public comment, either written or oral at the public hearing. Written should be submitted to me before the public hearing if you do want it included in the public hearing packet. And then after that, it will go to City Council. And City Council, the first public hearing is scheduled for October 7th. And then that will be kind of like after that, they'll might be a couple times where we go to City Council and they'll issue a decision. So it's likely that this whole project may be done by winter of this year, but to be determined.
Okay, thank you.
At the moment, I don't see any hands raised. There's a hand. So Ms. Lisa.
Hello, Lisa here. I had talked to someone at the planning department last year before this came out regarding our piece of parcel. And this is kind of a administrative question. I would like to still the opportunity to come in and bring my property in and talk about the options, because it's a large piece of property with the county on the front of the property, the city on the back of the property. And I just want to be able to partition 3 smaller lots in the back. Is that something that is possible to do?
Yes, so Andy Limberg on this call would be a great person to talk to. But of course, our front desk is open Tuesday through Friday, 8 a.m. till noon. We are closed from lunch from noon to 1, and then from 1 until 4. So if you have questions, we really recommend that you come to our front counter. Our planning staff are exceptional. Thank you, Andy and others on this call. They're happy to answer any questions, walk you through the application process. And yeah, that'd be a good opportunity to find out the next steps.
I don't see hands raised at this moment, but maybe we should wait a minute to see if somebody else has a question. Does anyone have a further question or comment?
Okay, hearing none. It's silent out there. Um, so thank you very much for everybody who attended. Obviously, our staff, they also attended and provided clarification on some of my comments. They're exceptional as well. Happy to answer any questions. Just to reiterate, Haley Campbell, I'm a senior planner, the project manager for this code amendment project. If you have any questions, you can come to our front counter, that's at City Hall. I'm happy to answer them. Again, we're open Tuesday through Friday, 8 a.m. to noon, closed from lunch from noon to 1, and then 1 to 4. You can also reach me over email. That's at H as in hat or home, Campbell as in Camp Bell at springfield-or.gov. And I will take your comments, your questions, and get back to you as soon as possible. So thank you very much. And again, if you want to view any of our public material that we discussed today, this recording will be up on our public outreach platform. That's Springfield, Oregon Speaks.org. And thank you very much. Sarah, you can end the recording anytime.